Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Shine. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure you'll agree that he deserves the title of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Ken Good, who's on the board of Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Ken graduated from Hardin-Simmons University, then earned his master's education degree at Tarleton State University in 1989, earned his law degree from Texas Tech, where he was a member of the Texas Tech Law Review. Mr. Good has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, along with numerous other courts of appeals. He's the author of Good on Bail, a practice guide created for the bail industry professionals. In addition, he has written numerous articles on the subject of bail reform. We welcome Ken Good for a return appearance on Saving America.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
Well, we enjoyed having you the first time, and we're looking forward to discussing things with you today. So, things have changed since you were last visiting with us. What impact did President Trump's announcement regarding cash bail for violent criminals have on the American court system? What have you seen?
Well, I would say it's had opposing impacts. So from the activists, it's rejuvenated them, made them redouble their efforts, and, probably be illogical in some of their arguments, and even more so. But I think it's also brought a spotlight on this area about the illogicalness, maybe is not a correct word, but it's highlighted this issue of bail reform and these soft on crime policies, and that how they're doing damage to our urban areas and our states that are embracing these policies for no other reason than politics, not because they're working.
Yeah, and it's been kind of interesting because I think the opposing view has largely been that minority and poor communities are the victims of this. But I think the crime statistics actually show the exact opposite, don't they, as to who's the victims?
Well, I think yes, but I would state it a different way. The people that they're trying to help with these criminal justice reform, bail reform measures end up being the people that are hurt the most by these policies, and that turns out to be the very people they claim they're trying to help. And so the people they claim they're trying to help are getting the actually the exact opposite. They're getting hurt the worst.
Yeah, because it's kind of interesting, and one of the things that we've seen, in the press is that a lot of the people who are the most vocal spokespersons, as people point out, often live in gated communities and have bodyguards and things, and those are not the people who are designed to help the situation, are they?
But they're making arguments that are not based on logic. They're making arguments
Sure.
that seem like they're just poll-tested rhetoric that's intended to cut off any debate. I mean, AOC is the best example. We need to defund the police to make it safer. Well, the science on defunding the police and its impact on public safety is well established. I mean, crime immediately goes up, but she continues to argue that we need to defund the police to become safer. And so it's not an argument based on science. It's just a political argument, and I would say rhetoric that's intended to cut off debate.
Yeah, well, it's and of course the scary facts that I hear in the press, and again I track the news very closely, is that she's been rumored to replace a possible replacement for Chuck Schumer in New York, and even a presidential candidate, and I find that rather extraordinary given her rather extreme positions on things.
I would have said 2 years ago that would never happen, but with what's just happened in the last week with the Mamdani endorsed candidates getting elected in New York, you could say that's very possible. But I think this is actually a good sign. It's a good sign that the Democrat Party is getting more extremist, are becoming more extremist, and as it gets more extreme, it's doing the same thing it did to conservatives, except for it's just chasing off everybody else except the extremists. And the reason why I say that is, Texas has always been a conservative state. Even when it was a Democrat state, it was a
Yes.
right of center Democrat state. And the reason why it became well entrenched as the Democrat Party is because by the Republicans is the Democrats chased off. They had no room anymore for conservatives. Well, they get to the point where they have no room for anyone but activists. They become a regional party, and they've been like that before in their history. And so I think that they are trying to do that again, maybe.
Yeah, it's a very strange world that we live in these days. Now, we hear so much in the news about cash bail. I thought all bail was cash. What am I missing?
Well, cash bail, I mean, when you're in the industry, that means different things in different areas, because bail is regulated by the states, but cash bail can mean the private industry, but cash bail can also mean you put up cash with the court. I mean, and the best place to see that differentiation is in Chicago and in Illinois. I mean, they got rid of the private industry, what we would think of as cash bonds a couple of decades ago, and that's when their crime started going up. But they still had cash bonds where you could post either a 10% or the court or the full amount of the bond with the court. And the problem is those courts started relying upon failures to appear, people's failures to fund court operations. So when they got rid of cash bonds, then that destroyed what was left. And when you get rid of those things and you were just doing simple release for everybody, you can't force people to come to court. There's no hammer to get people to come. And so you start having humongous failures to appear. And when you do that, you can't hold anybody accountable because you can't fill the jails up with everybody that failed to appear when you've got an 80% failure to appear rate. And so suddenly you're forced to dismiss cases, and criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime. And that's really what we've seen where all these policies have been embraced.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind as we're talking about this is uh, the fellow who is accused of killing his physical therapist wife here in Houston. And my better half is a physical therapist and knew the lady who was
Mm-mm.
murdered. And again, he's accused. He has not been found guilty, but this fellow was out. And I'm assuming he got a lower bail because they let him out and put him on an ankle monitor. He just cut the ankle monitor off and went to Italy, and I
Yeah.
think he's still over there claiming asylum because we have the death penalty here in Texas. Fortunately, I'm a huge proponent of the death penalty, by the way. So, I mean, are these ankle monitors kind of a joke then? I've seen a couple cut off news stories where people have cut them off, and it seems like they ought to be rigged so if you cut it off, the bells go off in the nearest four police stations or something.
Well, here's the little known fact about GPS monitoring is, if you wait till 5:30 on a Friday to cut off your GPS monitor, I mean, the GPS monitoring company may be notified and they may immediately send an email notification. Here's the problem. Nobody's going to receive it. Nobody's going to see it till Monday morning. And that's exactly what happened in the situation you mentioned. I mean, he cut it off after 5, so he got a 2.5 day head start, and he somehow got from Houston to Canada. In the meantime, he's got a forged passport that he travels on from Canada to Italy, and they find it, when he's trying to enter Italy, and so they take him into custody. And he immediately claims, "Well, they're trying to prosecute me for the death penalty." Well, they're not. I mean, they haven't claimed the death penalty in his case. So he was very well prepared. Grew his hair out for 8 months, grew a beard out for 8 months, got a false passport. So I mean, this guy planned this for a long period of time, and he's still in Italy fighting extradition, asking for asylum, and he doesn't have any problem lying. I have a feeling he'll be back. It's just a question of when.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that him coming back doesn't include taking the death penalty off the table, and
Well, I
that's
think
part
the
of the issue there.
But the state's position is they were never seeking the death penalty. But I think that probably if they were, that would probably have to be taken off the table. But I think the DA's position is we weren't seeking the death penalty in that case. But,
Yeah.
where the activists come in now, I mean, the newest arguments I'm seeing is they're saying, well, that was a stupid failure to appear. He just overslept. It wasn't willful. And so we should only hold a willful failure to appear against somebody. And I'm just telling you, that's the newest argument by the activists to try that tie the hands of judges because well, if we can only look at willful, how do we ever prove any failure to appear as willful? Willful is an intent crime. So you got to get inside the mind of the defendant, and he has a Fifth Amendment right not to testify against himself. So I take when the activists argue we should focus on willful, they're admitting failures to appear are increasing substantially, just like we've been arguing. And so now they have to focus the argument on failures to appear to only a subset, willful failures to appear, so that they can try to win that argument. And I think it's an admission that all the stuff they've been trying is just an absolute failure.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we want to chat about is we continue to hear about accused criminals committing more crimes while they're out on bail. What needs to be done to improve things? And I was thinking specifically, again, Houston's a huge city and unfortunately has a significant crime problem. We had this guy the other day who is accused of running over his girlfriend. Of all things, there were three people on the moving crew, and it was a man, his girlfriend, and another guy. And they were moving furniture. He got in an argument with her, runs over her in the moving truck. He gets arrested 20 miles away. And I did some research on the backstory for one of my Saving America pieces, and he was out on bail for having been arrested for using the same moving truck to dump stuff in a vacant lot, not a legal dumping area. So it doesn't sound like he was learning very much from the exercise, does it?
No. And, I think what those types of arguments show, especially in Houston, is how all of the activist arguments are wrong. They keep saying, oh, we've got first-time offenders stuck in jail. No, that is absolutely not true. And you know it from your example, because if we had just first-time offenders in jail, we'd get rid of them and we would hold the people that have criminal records. We have so many people in jail because our police are not allowed to arrest a lot of crimes. Crime is increasing. So we're now having to let repeat offenders out of jail to prevent the jail from being so overcrowded. We're already sending people to Louisiana from Houston to hold them. So it's just to keep it from getting worse. I mean, the reality is it needs to get worse for a little period of time, have more people in jail, and then the criminals will react and they will change their posture. The problem is the politicians are not willing to do that right now.
Yeah. Well, following up on the moving truck stories, is for some reason he saw two different judges, one for running her over, and they're only accusing him of manslaughter, which I find interesting because it sure sounds deliberate, which would be at least second-degree murder if it was a crime of passion. And then number two, they said failure to stop after he hit her and render aid. And in each case, the two different judges issued $60,000 bonds. So he's only, for what I consider murder, I don't care whether you call it manslaughter or second degree, is out on well, I don't know if he's physically out of jail yet today, but $120,000 bail doesn't sound like a lot of money for somebody who was already on bail and committed a murder of some kind.
Well, we have a fight going on in Texas between the Texas legislature and, Harris County, really the commissioner's court, over who sets bail policy. And that fight's been going on for 2, 3, 4 years. And it's kind of come to a head. And, we have magistrates in Harris County that set most of the bail. But we passed a bill in the last legislative session that says if you're a Chapter 54 magistrate, you can't magistrate certain offenses, including murder, manslaughter. So, the magistrate wouldn't be able to set that bond. They would have to go to the district court or a district court judge to have that bond set. So that may be why you have two different judges that set the bail. And I think that's probably a good thing because, the first two cases under the new Texas Constitution where you can deny bail, they were both in Houston. Both had motions filed by the DA. They were both involved high school kids, but in both situations, the judge denied bail and held them in pretrial. I don't think that would have been done before that constitutional amendment because we have this fight going on, and I've had a sheriff tell me I went to court in Houston because I didn't want that guy released, and the judge called me up to the bench and said my party wants these people released, so I'm going to release them. So it's all about
Whoa.
politics, politics, politics.
Well, and something that's probably tangential to our discussion today is the fact that Texas is one of the few states where we have pure political elections for judges. A lot of states, we have people that are appointed by the legislature, and then they stand for up or down elections periodically and things like that. But our system is partisan, and it is interesting because you made parting reference to it a few minutes ago, is that we do seem to be having a political swing here in Houston, Harris County, where during the last election, judicial elections, almost every Democrat who was opposed by a Republican, the Republican was elected.
Hmm.
And the best we can tell is this was directly related to the public catching on to the fact that there are a lot of no cash bails and liberal and low bail settings, and just letting people out on the street who have tough records and ought to be under a little bit more restraint.
There was a
So I think the
group that
public's catching on.
Well, there was a group that was running ads during this last election cycle, and they picked all of our major metropolitan areas to run those ads, and they were very, very powerful, highlighting the inequities that you've mentioned and you've touched on, and they ended with vote Republican on judges, vote Republican on judges. The problem is they ran those ads in Bexar County as well, and none of the Democrat judges in Bexar County had any opponents. So they were running, so they kind of threw away their money in Bexar County. But they were very effective, like you mentioned, in Harris County. And I think, and like you said, almost every judge that had a Republican opponent lost. But what we've done since then also is we've, as a part of the legislative package that was passed this last session, we now added to the judicial canons or the Judicial Ethics Commission, they can review complaints on judges that they're not following the bail policies set by the Texas legislature. And so that can be grounds for removal. But if someone files a complaint, the statute mandates that the judge has to be temporarily removed during the investigation. So that puts a lot of pressure. It used to be just an election. You mentioned we have partisan elections for judges. That's all it took for putting pressure on them to be law and order. We're now in this period of time, which I think is ending, where the politics is a little bit to the opposite direction in our urban areas. But I think, like you mentioned, it's coming to an end. And, it's self-correcting. The public always demands law and order. And if we don't have it for very long, the public will step in and demand it. And I think that's what's happening.
If you were giving advice to our wonderful Texas taxpayers in terms of this bail situation, what would you tell them to do? What can they do? One of the things you just mentioned is file a complaint, but can anybody file a complaint, or does it have to be somebody involved in the case, a victim or something?
That's a good question. That's an area that we don't know the answer to yet. But since the election cycle before this one, the DA's office in Harris County filed some complaints against judges that were just out in left field. And one of them, got either announced he wasn't going to run for reelection, and he got sanctioned by the commission. So I don't know. I think that's going to be uncharted territory, and it's going to be how obvious is the complaint. So we have a statute now that precludes personal bonds for certain violent offenses. So if a judge grants a personal bond for a violent offense and someone from Joe Q Public files a complaint, I mean, that seems to be a laydown. I'm not sure that they would say, oh, well, that's not going to go anywhere because it was not filed by someone. And so I think that it's going to depend on the complaint. So is what I think. But the first one has not been filed, so it's uncharted territory.
Going to be a fascinating process. Well, Kenya, as you know, we try not to abuse our guest time. How can my audience get more information about you and your organization?
Well, we have our own website called pbtx.com, the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories. We have our own podcast. There's a link on our menu, or you can just go directly to thebellpost.com. Thebellpost.com. You know, we talked about what's willful failure to appear, and we're fixing to do a bunch of podcasts on what willful is and why that's suddenly become an issue. And we're going to take that apart and put it back together. And I don't think the activists will like that when we're done.
All righty. Well, we're looking forward to it.